So thank you everyone for joining DataCon LA 2022. Welcome to the data engineering track. My name is Mrinmoy. I'm your host, and your co-host today is Courtney. He's sitting over here. And please adhere some COVID rules and regulations. I would request you to silence your phone during the session. This session is currently streaming via Zoom, and it would be recorded and it would be available online in a few weeks. Today, we have our honorable guest, Emad, and he will be talking about customer-driven data engineering. He has been named Entrepreneur Magazine's top CTO to watch in 2022. Emad is recognized globally as an execution-focused CTO, board member, and powerful transformation leader. He has held the CTO positions at a number of enterprise brands, including Expedia. So without further ado, I'll hand this over to the speaker. Thanks for being here.
All right, thank you. Do we have the presentation up just before I want to make sure I cycle through that. So thank you guys for coming. I've been told I can't move around, so I'm going to try to be stationary, which is really hard. I appreciate everyone being here. It's a Saturday. It's hot. It was a long walk to this building. I know that well. So my wife and I came over as well here. So I appreciate everyone being here. There's a lot to cover as they're getting the slides up here. So I'm going to try to go fast.
Courtney?
And then we're going to try to leave some time at the end for questions. Okay. So give you a little background. I guess I can move now for a little bit. So I'm going to get out of my system. I've been a CTO for a long time, over 20 years. And every CTO job I've had, whether it's been at startups or enterprise brands, it's always been about data engineering and data architecture. So I have learned a lot, and I've had some time to reflect on lessons learned throughout. So, okay, so I'm going to try to stay stationary now. I'll stay fixed here. I've learned a lot. So what I'm doing today is to share those lessons with you. So we're going to share a number of them. I'm going to try to go through them as much as I can. Please take note if there's something that you want to talk about further or questions at the end. I'm happy to be available either right after or at any time afterwards. See if we could, so this is the number one thing I see with tech teams that I've worked with. Everyone's too busy to improve. Everyone's in meetings all the time, right? And it's like, how do you pause to actually make sure that you're making improvement that's durable? You know, like there's the old story about how lean manufacturing started at Toyota, right? They're on the assembly line, and when something went wrong, they all huddled together. Everyone that's building those components figured out what was wrong. Then they figured out how they're going to change, and the assembly line got better every time. But that pause, how much do you think that cost Toyota, right? But they recognized that the cost was greater in not pausing and not figuring out, like, how are we going to build durable things when everything goes wrong? And we have an issue on all of our tech teams now. Everyone is too busy to improve, right? So you're probably wondering, I love that you came here, but I don't think I've ever seen in the same sentence the words customer and data engineering. What does that mean exactly? And I want to talk a little bit about that. For me personally, I've always been driven by what's the impact to the customer. You know, even early in my career, I was going along the ride with sales and marketing, and they're kind of looking at me like, what are you doing? Just go code over there, right? But I want to know what sort of impact we are making. And if you think about the software spectrum and how we've evolved, right? At first it was product management. How do we get product closer to the customer? And usability was a big thing, and human factors engineering was a big thing. And then it was design, and then it was software engineers. How do we get software engineers closer to the customer, right? And now we're talking about data engineers being closer to the customer. It's no longer okay to just be in a room building data pipelines or doing data science, right? Now we actually got to figure out, like, how do we build relevance into what we're doing and hold ourselves accountable to that along the way. Along the way, I have always seen sort of themes, and I'm going to give you a little bit of background about how I think about technology, and then we're going to get into data engineering. but in every job I've ever had, every client I've ever worked with, somebody complains about one or all of these categories. We're too slow, our estimates suck, we're the costliest labor item in the budget, our customers are not satisfied. It's always one or more of these things, right? In terms of values, what I look at in terms of how I hold myself accountable as a data engineer, as a data engineering leader, and what I look for in others, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'm going to go through one of them in more depth, which is the engineering mindset. And what I mean by that is what makes us different is we have a relentless drive to get to root cause, right? We want to learn it firsthand. We don't want to learn it off PowerPoint. I always say we have too many PowerPoint monkeys on the team, right? We want to go into the code. It's one thing to say, I read an article about this. It's another thing to say, I POC'd it. I did it myself and I tried it out, right? So engineering is fundamentally firsthand knowledge. That's what it's about. And I could tell you in the data engineering space, and even more so in leadership rooms, we need that more than ever today. We need somebody in the room to say, prove it, show me, right? Too many things are being done by assumption. So how do I know my data engineering team is doing a good job? You don't, right? I think about it like, I'm a Lakers fan. Unfortunately, they suck these days, right? But the Lakers know when they've had a good game or a bad game. There's a score, there are stats, there's an agreement. They don't have to bring in the GM to have a meeting after and like, did we do good? Did we not do good? Right? And so we suffer in our space around that. There's really no standard. There's super granular metrics, right, that we look at, or there's the other end of the spectrum. We get judged on one metric, velocity, burn down, or deadline, whatever it is. And somewhere in the middle, there's a story. There's the truth, okay? I built this playbook for myself when I took on my first CTO job 20 years ago. I also struggled with the same thing. I was tasked with a $60 million data engineering rewrite as a first-time CTO. I didn't know what the hell I was doing, right? And so naturally, what do you do as an engineer? You start researching, trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I handle all this? How do I handle this technical debt and 8 different outsource vendors and high performers and low performers? And is it agile? Is it not agile? And all this stuff, right? There was no standard. So out of my own self-interest, I built my own playbook to hold myself accountable about how do I know that I'm actually doing a good job? And then I applied this playbook to all my data engineering projects over the last 20 years, right? So I'm sharing this with you. And so it's made up of 4 quadrants, right? How do I know that I'm working on the right things? Customer voice, right? It's all about the roadmap. How do I know that I'm building architecture that's durable, that's tech debt proof? And we're going to get into the details of that. I'm going to give you lessons learned in each of these categories, by the way. How do I know we're working with the right people and the right people in the right places? And how do I know that I am agile? I call it pragmatic agile because everyone says they're agile, but it's BS. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're having a 15-minute stand-up, a 20-minute stand-up, I don't care. Are we delivering customer value every day? Are we measuring ourselves? Are we learning from the measurement? Like, this is a time to go back to true agile principles, not the philosophies and all that. That belongs at the bar after work, right? We're here to make money and figure out how to do that in the most efficient way possible. Okay, so we're going to start with some lessons. I'm just going to throw lessons up there, right? Things that kind of put a stone in your shoe and make you think a little bit, hopefully, and help. But one thing is, usability practices, I mentioned them earlier, have largely been centered on software development, and naturally so. But they can also apply to data engineering. So I'm sharing a couple pictures up there, but we started usability workshops with data engineers and direct users. And it's mind-blowing, okay? It's like you're no longer behind a data pipeline and trying to figure out, okay, well, that BI group is using my pipeline and they're using Tableau. And you're now sitting with users saying, here are the questions I'm trying to answer. Here are the things that are being brought up in the room. Here are the things I wish I knew, right? And building a direct relationship between users or stakeholders, whatever you want to call them in your organization, with your data engineers. And this works. You can use all the usability practices that you have out there directly applied to data engineers. Here's another lesson. I think about data engineering as a product. So if we think about as a product, okay, if someone doesn't like what we do as data engineers, what do we naturally do? We blame them. Oh, those business guys, they don't get us. They don't understand us, right? But if it's a product, if our users don't like our product, do we blame them? We never blame them. We adjust. We adjust our roadmap, we fix bugs, we do all sorts of things, right? So if we think about data engineering as a discipline that's actually a product, that's interesting, right? And now when you think about that, as I do with software products, I think that you always want love or hate in software. If they love it, that's great. If they hate it, that means they want it to work. They're spending energy telling you that they want it to work. The biggest enemy that we have in software product development and in data engineering is indifference. It's being quiet. Now you don't even know if you're making an impact anymore, right? How many of us have been in like endless data governance meetings for weeks and weeks and weeks, not realizing what the impact is, and all of a sudden everyone's kind of turned off in those meetings, right? And it makes you question, like, what kind of impact am I making? So you want your users, whoever you define them to be, to love or to hate, right? And there's also what I call the law of proximity. I just talked about that. How many hops does it take for your data engineer to get to your direct user or customer, right? You want to make that distance as short as possible. And then there's Conway's law. Everyone knows Conway's law, right? Software reflects the structure that built it, right? So the more that we can build forums where we're bringing people together that don't typically work together, the better. And then the last piece I want to spend a little bit of time on this slide. I call it requirements archaeology. We need more and more in technology, people who have the ability to dig into the spirit behind customer requests. I don't know how many times, especially in a high pressure situation, a customer complains and it's taken verbatim into the roadmap. You go build it for 3 months, for 6 months, and then the customer comes back and says, that's not what I wanted. I wanted something completely different. Or maybe they wanted updated documentation, or maybe it was a process problem, or whatever it is, right? So you need people somewhere in that requirement stream to be able to dig, to have that like Socratic method of thinking and questioning, and to say, really, tell me more about that. Can you show me? Can you walk me through it? Like, how do we dig in past just the words that are being communicated? And I have a couple stories to share. I share all sorts of stories. My kids make fun of me because I repeat my stories now. They're like, we haven't heard a new story in years, Dad. So, you know, if I repeat my stories today, I apologize. But there's a great story, true story, at Procter & Gamble where they were having a problem. Their detergent was the lowest performing detergent in the rural parts of China. And they couldn't figure out why. And they tasked so many executives with it. Nobody could figure out why. And there was this young up and coming manager that they said, you know what, let's give this guy a shot. And they flew him up to headquarters and they had the red carpet up and they gave him a presentation. And about 5 minutes into the presentation, he got bored. And he said, excuse me, when am I going to China? And they all looked at him like, what? And he went and lived for 3 weeks side by side with his users, with his customers. And he learned a lot. And he learned like where they were taking their clothes down to the river, the water was actually really hard. It didn't interact well with the detergent. And he took all that golden knowledge and he went back to the lab and adjusted the formulas and worked with his team. And he turned the worst performing product at Procter & Gamble into the best performing product that year. He became their youngest VP in company history to this day. Now, what did he do? Nothing special other than go directly to the customer, right? Requirements archaeology. And our discipline in data engineering is desperate for this kind of courage, right? To be able to cut through the meetings and the bureaucracy and say, I just want to talk directly to the users and figure this out. The other was a story of mine. So when I first started as the CTO at Experian, so I was at the CTO at Experian for a number of years. When I first started there, my first week on the job, we were tackling what could be the biggest deal, sales deal in the company's history. Big deal, right? With a huge brand. And the sales guy had an SOW going, and there was a feature level commitment in the SOW. It said that you had to deliver columnar level encryption in 3 months' time or something like that. So I got to know the product, looked at the code. My team was telling me it was impossible, right? But I vetted it for myself and found actually it's going to take at least double the time, if not more. And so I got yelled at in every meeting by this global head of sales. You're the one that's going to lose the deal for us. You want me to call your boss? I'm like, sure, I have his number. Let's call. I mean, I don't care. I'm the first week on the job. The truth is the truth, right? So we're going back and forth, and then suddenly something struck me. I haven't talked to these guys that we're selling to. So I requested a meeting, and I don't believe in surprises. So I sent them an email just to kind of soft pedal it and say, hey, we can't really deliver this. I want to talk about alternatives. We got on the call, but it was a security feature, right? We got on the call, and before I could say anything, the guy on the other end said, I don't care about columnar level encryption. I just need to reassure my boss that your solution is secure. Totally different. If we had not got on that call, my team would have been diverted for 3 to 6 months on a feature that was not even needed. That's the power of requirements archaeology. And sometimes it's as simple as a question, right? Or direct contact. Give you one more, and then I promise I'll move on. Like I told you, I tell a lot of stories. This is also a true story. A famous dog food brand was really struggling with sales, okay? And they discovered it was a marketing problem, or so they thought. So they fired their CMO, hired a new one. They outsourced the marketing agency. Every time they did something different with marketing, they got the same result, okay? I kept going and going and going. The CEO was so frustrated. He stood up in an all hands meeting and he kind of went off script and he said, I don't know what's going on. And the manager all the way in the back said, I know. Sure, tell me what's going on. The dogs don't like the food. That was the problem, right? But no one actually dug in to ask. No one did the requirements archaeology. And so in the CEO's mind, he's being decisive, right? He's making changes, but a lot of times we're solving the wrong problems. And that can get very, very expensive in data engineering. So it's really up to us to be those archaeologists if others are not doing that on our behalf. Another lesson, query performance. This comes up in every team, every organization, right? By the time you start seeing significant query performance lags, it's like seeing mold in your home. It is too late. You got to rip that wall out, right? So a lot of times we want to be a lot more proactive. I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can be proactive about data architecture and technical debt. But query performance, I just worked on a project where someone raised their hand, talking about requirements archaeology, and said, I know how to solve query performance. We need to build a data warehouse, a new one, which of course has nothing to do with query performance, right? So they went off for a couple months doing that, and then we sort of redirected the team, right? But people don't understand, like once you start to see that where customers are complaining about it, we have a problem. Disease of dichotomies. Okay, this is interesting. This is what I call disease of a dichotomy. We suffer from this in society, let alone in technology. We're fooled into thinking there are always only two options. And that is not true. We live in a fascinating, complex world that has a lot of options, right? And in technology, the way we see it, the way I've seen it play out is either I come into a legacy architecture and I go, this sucks. We need to rewrite all of it. And until we do, we're not going to be better. Or we just can't change anything in this legacy architecture. We're doomed. That's just slow. It's one end or the other, right? But the truth is somewhere in the middle. Like, how do we build evolutionary, iterative, incremental development? How do we kill the monolith in little chunks? And what does that look like? And over the years, we designed these incremental sort of plans and tie them to customer pain, right, for data engineering. So it's not just, oh, I'm building a new ETL layer. And everyone's like, okay, that sounds really good. I promise in 6 months it'll be better. Versus I'm building ETL layer, and in the first 2 sprints, we're going to, you remember those customer incidents that happened last 6 months? Those are never going to happen again after we finish the first 30 days of development. Now I understand sort of traceability of customer pain to my incremental evolutionary development against a monolith. Funny little boxes there. Data engineering requires trust. A lot of the projects in data engineering are not one sprint. They're not 1 month. They're several months. Sometimes they're a couple years worth, right? So it requires trust. And customers do not trust naturally, right? And who blames them? They've been through a lot of trauma themselves. Everyone has a traumatic story about software. We certainly internally have our own traumatic stories about technology leaders. Everyone's got a bad story about somebody in your career path, right? So we're all traumatized, I guess is my point. So we got to build trust. And to build trust, a lot of times we're trying to force a long pole. We're trying to say, well, we need a year, we need $2 million, we need $30 million, whatever it is, and then everything's going to be great, right? Just trust us. But what that requires is credibility. Trust requires credibility. The foundation of credibility is customer wins. And this is the disease of dichotomies, right? It's not either short-term customer pain or I build this architecture. It's like, how do we bring these two things together, right? We're building architecture along the way and solving customer pain. You know what that does for us? Holds us accountable. What learning are we getting when we're solving customer pain, building momentum, building credibility, and we're injecting that learning back into our long-term plans? That's awesome. That's great if we can figure out a way to do that. Okay, and the picture, if you see there, if you can't see there, it's a guy with a ladder, and he's pulling the rungs off the ladder to keep himself warm, not realizing he's actually disabling his ability to get over the wall, right? So what's that? Short-term, long-term balance. I'm a big believer in whole systems thinking, right? Taking a system view. Naturally, when any team scales, when any architecture scales, you scale in your pieces, in your various areas. You're not thinking about the whole system typically, right? So I think about data flow. What does a data flow look like? Like the old use case diagrams that we used to do back in the day. I still think they're valuable. I got a couple laughs, and that's good. So I think about that as applied to a data flow. Like, show me, where does the data come in? How is it used? Where is it transformed? Where is it stored? Where does it go? Right? What visualization platform does it end in? Or what system does it end in? Right? What is my end-to-end data flow? And if you look at that, in a lot of organizations, no one owns that end-to-end pipeline. People own pieces of it typically, right? So we want to take a whole systems view. We need people that are going to own the end-to-end pipeline, the whole systems view, and optimize and figure out how is that going to work. Why? Because that's how our users see it. Whether they see the components of the pipeline or not, they see it as a whole system. You bring in data, I use data on the other end. That's how they think. So we want to take their thinking and inject it as an accountability in a way for us to plan. So I mentioned this before, right? So I'm a big believer in this, and I think we need it more and more in data engineering circles. I think the two most powerful words in a meeting, which by the way, I hate meetings. Does anyone like meetings? I don't think anything changes in a meeting, but that's a whole nother talk for another conference. The two most powerful words in a meeting are prove it. We should be in a culture where it is okay to say that, right? We're engineers after all. But how many times is my team's time wasted on what I call MBA, management by assumption? Someone comes in the room and says, that'll never work. And all of a sudden we're spinning up a bunch of meetings to try to convince them, right? When all we have to say is, actually, really, can you show me how it's not going to work? Can you prove it to me? Or the flip side, I know just the solution for that. And then we go off and start making all this investment, all this work on it. Instead of just saying, can you walk me through that? Prove it to me. Show it to me, right? Because it's a lot cheaper for me to ask the hard question now than to take our most precious asset in a company, not just in a technology team, which is the technology team's time. That is the most precious asset in a company, right? Every finance officer is going to tell you the same thing. You're the most expensive labor cost in the company. But we got to treat it as such, and we got to protect it, right? So we need those two words in every meeting. And by the way, as you move up in leadership ranks, executive meetings, boardrooms, this becomes even more important, right? All right, technical debt. Okay, got it. I'm getting my 10-minute signal, so I got to go faster. Technical debt. Nobody knows what technical debt means. Everyone has a different definition of it, right? But I want to key in on a very specific practice. Okay, when we think about technical debt, we think offensive strategies. I believe there are offensive strategies and defensive strategies. We think offensive strategies. How are we going to evolve the architecture? How are we going to get out of this monolith? How are we going to get out of ETL hell? How do we get out of these stored procedures, right? It's always, what new thing are we going to build to replace existing functionality? But I think there's something missing, which is defensive maneuvers to prevent technical debt. Every day, everybody is contributing to technical debt in some way or another. It's not a management problem. It's what happens on a daily basis. It's the little decisions that developers make on a daily basis. Unintentional, okay? It's not somebody's like, there's a pirate here, like, let me add to technical debt today. That's my role, right? That's not it, right? So we need defensive maneuvers. We need a way to stop the bleeding right away as we figure out where we're going. So what are those anti-patterns? If, for example, all our business logic and stored procedures, and you don't like that for some reason, well, maybe one of those anti-patterns is we will not contribute another line of code to a stored procedure moving forward in any sprint, period. That's a defensive maneuver to stop the bleeding, right? It's like when someone's sick and you come to them and you say, well, I got the cure. I just need 6 months, but they're sick right now. They need some immediate practices to help them right now. So we need both, right? So this defensive thing is often overlooked, and I want to highlight that. I think there's room for accountability, for education with developers on a daily basis so that we can help stop the bleeding, at least stop the negative contribution. I'm almost done, I think. So incidents, incident-based alerting. So alerting and monitoring comes up a lot. And I wanted to just highlight that real quick. People are mired in Datadog and all sorts of other tools. There's a million different alerts that we're saturated against, yet customers still find issues with our data architecture before we do somehow, okay? So one of the methods that I found really effective is actually to go back to actual customer incidents. So rather than trying to figure out through the thousands of alerts that I have, try to make some sense of it and work bottoms up, I work top down. I go take a couple of the customer incidents where customers found problems before I did, and then I map that to all my alerts and go, okay, well, which alerts would have helped me here? And prioritize that, right? So it cuts through all the different alerts that I have to take. An incident-based alerting process is really, really effective, right? And it helps you justify your efforts in the alerting space to all your business users to say, hey, that incident that just happened, I'm working to make sure that never happens again, right? I'm gonna take one more, and I want to leave some time for questions. I found this other practice to also be really, really cool. I know it's an old movie, Minority Report. So preemptive load testing. So what I like to do, and there are implications of this, right? You have to have automation in place. You have some maturity in your DevOps cycle, and on and on and on. But I like to be able to have the capability to run proactive load tests once a month, or you can take any frequency you like. Why? That tells me proactively where my architecture is busting at the seams. So I don't wait for a customer to tell me, hey, we've got some scale problem or a load issue. I already know. I have a whole backlog of stuff because I'm running this on a regular basis. Think about it like a health check, right? I need to health check my data architecture for performance. Okay, maybe I'll end on this one. I know 5 minutes. All right, so I'm going to end on this one. So process. We can't overlook process and the way we do things, right? I call it minimum viable bureaucracy. In other words, just enough process to help us, right? Bureaucracy can be anywhere, can be in a startup, any size company. right? As we scale, we build processes, we're trying to help. All of a sudden you have this web of process, right? If you've ever been in a meeting just about the way we do things, there is a problem. The process is supposed to be like the light switch. Flip it on. We're not talking about the lights right now because they work. It just works, right? You're supposed to flip the switch and it works. We're not talking about the electrical current, how it's going to arrive there, but we spend so much time on process. And so a lot of the lessons that I've learned is like, how do we cut through that? You know, agile, waterfall, safe, not safe, dangerous, whatever you want to talk about. That's all for after work. You can have all sorts of philosophical debates, right? But it's like, how do we pragmatically deliver customer value through a process that supports us? All right, so I have a few more slides, but I do want to leave some time for questions. So I'm going to end here. This was just a quick lesson. Okay, I lied to you. I'll end with this one. A lot of engineers I work with, and me too in my own career early on, I always thought it was my responsibility as a data engineer to explain to others how hard my job is, how complex it is. If only you understood, right? That is dead wrong. And if you're doing it, you're wasting time. Our job is the opposite. They're never going to understand our complexity. We're engineers. We're the ones carrying the complexity. We're the ones that understand it, right? They're never going to come to us. They're our users. We have to go to them. So we have to build an API to them, an interface, right? We hide the implementation and we have an abstracted view for them to help them understand what we're doing, what we're going through, right? So I want to leave you with that. I have a lot more that I want to share. I know you guys will have the deck available, but I wanted to make sure we honor time. So I think we'll open it up to any questions if anyone has questions.
So unfortunately, we do not have a microphone to carry around, but if you have a question, please do hand the mic to me, just to him so we can answer for people on the call.
So I could just pretend not to hear you. Yeah, ask a question.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I don't know if you can hear me, but
yeah, go for it.
As a technical founder, I'm a software engineer myself, but I'm founder of a company.
Yep.
This is so true. And when a developer reveals that gap in code, I develop most of our mobile development side of our apps. They completely change the tone, right? And I think that's one of the things that leadership also do is to not expect their employees to actually have to explain themselves.
Yes.
Flex adoption. I think it's also top down. It's super important that they empathize and understand that you are doing very complicated. It might seem simple if you're a very senior engineer, but I think this is such a valuable slide. In general, for any reason, it sets the right tone for culture to really thrive.
Yeah, I really appreciate you seeing that and confirming that. It's so true. And what this reminds me of was a cartoon I saw years ago where there were two developers on a whiteboard and it was like a super complicated architecture diagram. And they kept going from strip to strip. He talked to his manager and then director, and it kept getting simpler and simpler and simpler. And finally, the last part of the strip was he's talking to the CEO, and all you saw was that. Right? Like, is it good or is it not? Like, I just need to know, right? So, yeah, absolutely. Other questions?
And that's not.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm fascinated by your talk. So I've been looking
Thank you.
for a great CTO that can implement these kind of best practices. Do you recommend some type of like playbook that you maybe created from your experience? Do you have a playbook? That's something I'm doing now in my current company, and I'm doing this software implementation stick around. It's really
Like that. It's a good plug.
You know, as we're building a team, we're about to raise a seed round, about to hire a significant amount of people, not significant, but
Sure.
team. It hit me out of the IB section coding and what. What do you recommend in terms of finding a good playbook for organization, creating one? You can try to organically create one, like you said, like
Yep.
simple best practices. You don't do this. What do you do?
Yeah, it's great. You couldn't have teed it up better. So at the beginning of the talk, and I have it in the deck, and I'm happy to talk to you about it after as well. I built a playbook for myself that I actually help companies with now. And I built it 20 years ago when I was first a CTO, first time CTO. So I'm happy to share it with you, walk through it with you. Yeah, absolutely. We can do that. Yeah.
Great job.
And congrats, by the way. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
So
perspective, how to go about it, and then it's not sense. I'm curious, I've been exploring a little bit from the perspective, trying to from data science because they try to do the ML and stuff, and they go to data, figure it out. And I'm curious, I don't want to burden somebody, to not synthesize, so I just have to look at the process as well. So I'm curious, like, in your perspective, from what would you suggest from data scientists to try to not be here with the technique we're talking about?
Is your question around how data scientists would communicate with data
Yeah, like,
engineers?
your approach.
Yep.
Like, it's like, okay, you know what you're talking about, like how you approach it, you go to customer recipient. Like, if I'm in the position, let's say I'm a data scientist. Like,
Absolutely.
Like what kind of like principles should I incorporate in myself?
I think, there's a whole nother talk about that, but I think very simply, it's questions, man. It's like asking questions. Like that's all Socrates and Plato did, was ask questions, right? And it's how you learn. That's how I got to know my wife when I first met her, right? You ask her, what's your name? What's your phone number? Like, you get to know people, right? It starts with questions. So I think, sometimes I found myself waiting for a company process to roll out to bring us together. Oftentimes just emailing someone in a different group, a sales guy, a marketing guy. Hey, I want to learn. I'm the data scientist here and I want to learn about what you do. They're always going to give you your time. They're always going to give you time. And I actually just worked with a company where data scientists were doing ride-alongs with police officers in police cars, right? For software. They were there on the front lines, right? And that's a game changer when they're doing their own work. So I would say reach out.
Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. I could keep going. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you guys very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much for your presentation. Thank you, Adonai, for your question. So if any questions you have, please feel free to get in touch with Emad.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also thank you of Dichotomies. Hope you have enjoyed the. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
I love it.